Hey guys, what's up? It's Rygar the Destroyer, and today we're going to be doing part 3 of my 1/6 scale figure collection. Now, this is the final part. Obviously, as you can see, it's all my Hasbro 12-inch stuff, and I've got everything from modern Hasbro 12-inch figures, Forces of Destiny, all the way back to stuff from the 1990s. So we've got a ton of stuff to go through, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. Alright, up first we have got some of my oldest figures here. I believe the majority of these are from Power of the Force line, but over here on the side we've got the Power of the Force Snowtrooper. Now, as you can see, this figure is really showing its age. Honestly, it's not the most faithful recreation of a snowtrooper, but as far as I'm concerned, it does a good job of kind of filling out the ranks for cheap. Obviously, I don't have the budget to buy every single Hot Toy or Sideshow figure that's come out, so for some of these characters that are less important to me, I pick the cheaper option, and frankly, I think this snowtrooper looks fine for what I paid for it. And that's kind of the same thing with this Luke over here. Now, one thing I will say is that the likeness to, Mark Hamill is not great, but the job that Hasbro did on the costuming is absolutely fantastic. It's a little bit bulky, obviously, but they just did an excellent job with all the stitching and everything on here. I think this figure looks really great. And then finally, in the middle, obviously the biggest figure here is Han on his Tauntaun. Let me just get these guys out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. This figure is amazing. Now, like Luke, he doesn't have the greatest sculpt work for Han, but as far as the Tauntaun itself goes, this is really awesome. I picked this figure up, like the combo of these, for $30. And frankly, how can you beat that? This is like well over 12 inches tall, when Han's riding it. The sculpt work is pretty good. The Tauntaun's articulated, Han's articulated, comes with a ton of accessories. How can you beat that? This is a great way to kind of fill up your collection with a whole bunch of statement pieces for cheap, and that's what I think Hasbro is best at ultimately. Alright, continuing on with two more huge statement pieces are Luke and Leia on speeder bikes. Now, these are older figures, and frankly, the figures themselves, Luke and Leia, have not aged well. But when they are riding these speeder bikes, they look absolutely fantastic. I'm not sure if it'll really show up on camera, but here's my hand next to these. These bikes are huge, and they look amazing when they're posed on your shelf. And frankly, these are the most affordable way, at least in my opinion, to get a nice looking 1/6 scale speeder bike on the shelf for a reasonable price. You can pick these figures up. These are the cheaper of the 3 releases. There was a 3rd release that came with a Biker Scout, but it's typically more expensive, so I don't have that one. But I have these two, and they look amazing. The speeder bikes are awesome, and when they're posed on your shelf, they really do make huge statements just because of the amount of real estate they take up and the sculpt work that Hasbro put in on the bikes. Really, really cool pieces, and I highly suggest that you pick these up if you're a fan of Return of the Jedi or you just like really cool, huge toys. Up next, we have got a really strange and really huge figure set, and that is Captain Tarpals and his Kadu. Now, the reason that I say that this figure set is so strange is that it's a huge set. I mean, these figures are absolutely massive. The feathers on the Kadu, as you can see up here, are so tall that they won't even fit in frame. I can't even get him on the backdrop. So it's just strange to me that Hasbro made these figures so large, especially since they're not really characters that played huge roles in the movie. That being said, they did an amazing job. Now, this Captain Tarpals figure, I think, does a really nice job of representing the character. I don't think they got the skin tone 100% correct. I think he's a little bit too light. But that being said, the costuming and everything on it is really well done, and so is the paintwork, as you can see here on his arms. If it'll focus. There we go. Very, very nicely done. But the reason that I was drawn to this set, at least initially, is the Kadu itself. Now, as you can see, here's my hand next to it. It's absolutely enormous, and the sculpt and paintwork on it is absolutely fantastic. The design is really cool, at least in my opinion, and it stands up incredibly well. You'd think for something that's got these long, spindly legs and then kind of like hangs over, It stands super well. It's just one of those things that we probably won't ever get toys like this again. Just, you know, huge toys made of random kind of like characters that didn't play huge roles in the movie. So either way, I'm glad to have it in the collection, and I definitely recommend picking this figure set up because it's cheap and it's very unusual, so a lot of people won't have it. Alright, up next we have got all of my droid characters, and these kind of vary in age from all the way back in the 1990s to up to the kind of modern era. And typically I stay away from the modern Hasbro 12-inch figures. Typically I think of them as like dollar store garbage. Really not worth the money that you would pay for them. But these four figures that I've kind of cherry-picked from the line, I think do a really nice job of representing their characters. Let's take a look at C-3PO here first. Now obviously this is the Force Awakens version with the red arm, but look at the sculpt work on here. He's not really that well articulated, but frankly, you know, for a character like C-3PO, who cares? You pretty much only need him to stand just like this, and for that, this figure is really good. The sculpt work on it, I think, is some of the most lifelike that they've done for the character, so I really recommend picking this one up if you don't have a 12-inch C-3PO. Now, it does unfortunately have the red arm, which kind of pegs him as the Force Awakens version, but hopefully we'll eventually get some re-releases that are all gold or gold with a silver leg. I think would be pretty cool. Now, next to him, we have got R2-D2, and this figure is not perfect by any means. As you can see, it's got a very gray dome instead of silver, which I think really makes the figure look cheap, and he doesn't have a third leg. But as far as just having an R2 to just sort of sit in front of your original trilogy characters, I think this figure does fine. And, you know, when it was released, you could get these for less than 10 bucks. So as far as I'm concerned, you can't go wrong there, at least until you can fill R2 with a, you know, a different version. Behind him, we've got what's essentially the same figure, some minor tweaks on it. This is just a background astromech droid. It came in a 3-pack with that C-3PO, and while it does do a nice job of representing its character, I personally just don't care enough about this guy to remember his name. Moving on, we do have BB-8, and this one here, I put with my Force Awakens Hot Toys figures, and for me at least, I can't even tell the difference. I'm sure that the Hot Toys one is much nicer. I can almost guarantee that it is in every way. But frankly, you know, you could get this figure for less than 10 bucks. And in my mind, at least, I would rather spend the money somewhere else, since this figure is, you know, good enough in my opinion. I'm not really sure that the extra money that you'd spend on a Hot Toys one is worth it, at least for me. Maybe it is for you, but not for me. Next up, we've got a much older figure, and that is this Battle Droid Commander. Now, this is a figure that I think is pretty well done, especially for its age. It is by no means perfect, and it is by no means the best representation of the Battle Droid, but for cheap, I think it does a nice job. And it comes with, you know, like the binoculars and the gun and everything, and the removable, I think it's removable at least. Yeah, removable antenna on the back, which is pretty cool. And I think the sculpt work and everything on it is really well done. And the articulation that is there is fairly well done. So I definitely do like this figure. And then finally, probably my favorite from this lineup here is this R5-D4. Now this one is back from the Power of the Force line, and they just knocked it out of the park. It's got a retractable third leg, you know, fully articulated legs, with, you know, the ankles and everything, which is super cool, and obviously the head spins, and then the paint and sculpt work on it is pretty much perfect. So as far as I'm concerned, no reason to buy the Sideshow one, just go for this one. It's way cheaper, and it looks just as good, at least in my opinion. So let's go ahead and move on. Alright, up next are some figures that I'm sure a lot of you wouldn't want to be included on this list, but I have a lot of good things to say actually about Forces of Destiny. Now I know about half of you just stopped watching this video, so I won't spend much time on it, but if there are two things that you want to take away from this video, it's that every 1/6 scale collector should have at least Sabine and Ahsoka in their collection. These two figures especially do an excellent job of representing their character, and it's the only ones that are done in 1/6 scale. These are the only two figures that either have a helmet to hide their kind of like doll hair or don't have any hair on them at all. So personally, to me, they look more like action figures, and that's why I have them here. But all of these figures can be picked up for basically nothing. They made way too many of these and we're giving them away, and personally that's why I picked them up. I think all of them do a decent enough job at representing their character, and that's why I have them in my collection. Alright, the last figures that we're going to look at are, frankly, some of my favorites, and these are the Hasbro 12-inch line that was released around Attack of the Clones, and I think it was a point where Hasbro had really hit their stride. They have probably the best mixture of articulation and a mix of soft goods and sculpted pieces, with, really nice paint apps and sculpt work. And I think, frankly, for the price that you can buy these figures at, they are amazing. I'm not really sure why they're not more popular, but, that's better for me because that just makes them cheaper. But let's go ahead and take a look here. The first one we'll take a look at is this Yoda. And as you can see here, obviously he's not as well sculpted as if it'll focus. Anyway. He's not as well sculpted as like a Sideshow or Hot Toys figure, but there's something kind of enduring about these. As you can see, he's got a little bit of fuzz glued to the back of his head where his hair is, which is dumb, but kind of charming. And frankly, I think that this figure looks good enough. You can buy them for fairly cheap, and he comes with his chair and everything, so a really cool Yoda, in my opinion, to add to the collection. Behind him, we've got the AT-ST driver, and frankly, this figure looks great. It's a character that I would not buy a Hot Toys or Sideshow of, and so the fact that you can get this guy for less than 20 bucks to kind of fill a position in your collection is awesome. And frankly, if Hot Toys or Sideshow made one that showed this guy up in every way, I still wouldn't buy it because I like this figure so much. And that's the same kind of feeling that I have with this Imperial officer here. Sideshow has made some Imperial officers in the past, but now they're so expensive that I've been priced out of the market. So this guy here for less than 20 bucks does a really nice job of just being a background character, which I really like. Now, behind him is Zuckuss. And this figure is honestly, in its own right, awesome. It's not perfect by any means, and as you can see, mine is starting to crack just because it's old, but they did an amazing job on this figure. And frankly, this is the version of Zuckuss that I would go for if you're trying to make the Bounty Hunter lineup in 1/6 scale. I think that it looks perfect, and for the price that you can buy him, there's really no beating him, at least in my opinion. And the final figure that we're going to take a look at is Count Dooku, and this is probably Hasbro's best 12-inch figure that they've ever done. Let me pull the face up to the camera so you can see it. The sculpt work on there is absolutely amazing. They did an amazing job, and while the paint apps are not on par with like Hot Toys or Sideshow, this figure competes with Hot Toys and Sideshow in every way possible. And for the longest time, it was the only and the best version of Count Dooku that you could buy. But frankly, even after the Hot Toys one has been released, it is still a contender. You can buy these figures for less than 20 bucks all day, and I've definitely seen some repaints that make this head sculpt look as good as a Hot Toys figure. So overall, I really do love the Hasbro 12-inch line. And I know that that's something that isn't super common. For some reason, people just don't connect with it as much as the 3 3/4 inch figures. But frankly, if you don't collect these figures, I highly recommend you start. They're a really nice way to get into 1/6 scale collecting, just because a lot of them are cheaper and you can find them. And frankly, a lot of them, like Count Dooku here, look pretty darn good. So anyway, I'll go ahead and see you guys later.